In the world of high-stakes defense procurement, there is a fine line between a strategic breakthrough and an expensive firework. Last week, the internet, or at least the segment of it that obsessively tracks Chinese military tail numbers, erupted over a supposed leak from China's state broadcaster, CCTV. The claim? That the Shenyang J-35, the crown jewel of China's carrier-based stealth ambitions, can only sustain combat flight for exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes! To put that in perspective, that is roughly the time it takes to boil a medium-sized egg or wait for a slow elevator in a DC office building. If true, the J-35 isn't a fifth-generation fighter, it's a manned rocket with a very brief, very tragic appointment with the ocean. For the casual observer, this is a moment of pure irony, a made-in-China punchline delivered on a global stage. But for US Indo-Pacific Command, the math of a 7-minute fighter isn't a joke, it's a variables check. If the J-35 is truly short-legged, the entire strategic geometry of the South China Sea shifts. The much-hyped Fujian supercarrier becomes an 80,000-ton floating paperweight, and the Great Wall of Steel looks more like a row of expensive lawn ornaments. But is the J-35 a failure of physics, or are we witnessing a failure of interpretation? Today, we aren't just looking at the headlines, we are deconstructing the J-35's strategic endurance, the reality of the WS-19 engine, and why, even if it only flies for 7 minutes, the J-35 still keeps US defense planners awake at night. To understand why a 7-minute timer matters, we have to look at the ship the J-35 was built to defend. The Type 003 Fujian. Commissioned in November 2025, the Fujian is more than just a hull, it is China's declaration of naval independence. Unlike its predecessors, which relied on primitive ski jump ramps, the Fujian uses an electromagnetic aircraft launch system, or EMALS. This is the same high-energy technology found on the US Navy's Gerald R. Ford class. For Beijing, the J-35 is the essential bolt in this machine. It was designed to be the first stealth fighter capable of launching from these catapults, carrying a full fuel load and internal weapons to challenge US air superiority over the first island chain. On paper, it was the F-35 killer that would finally close the qualitative gap between the PLA Navy and the US 7th Fleet. However, the 7-minute narrative exposes a jagged crack in that vision. From a US defense planning perspective, the central strategic question isn't whether China can build a stealth shape. We know they can. The question is whether they can build a stealth system. If the J-35 is struggling with endurance, it suggests that while China has mastered the bits of digital design, it is still being humbled by the atoms of aerospace engineering, specifically high-performance jet engines. For Washington, this isn't just a technical trivia point, it changes the entire calculus of how close a US carrier strike group can get to Chinese shores before the J-35 runs out of breath. The metallurgy of ambition. To understand the 7-minute rumor, we have to look at the heart of the machine, the engines. For decades, the Achilles heel of Chinese aerospace hasn't been stealth shaping or radar, it has been the turbine blade. According to reports from Jane's Defense Weekly and industrial trackers like Oriate AI as of early 2026, the J-35 is currently in a state of evolutionary limbo. The aircraft was designed for the WS-19 Shenyang engine, a power plant intended to provide the thrust-to-weight ratio necessary for true fifth-generation performance. But while the J-35 is rolling off the assembly line in Shenyang, the WS-19 is still navigating the treacherous waters of mass production stability. For now, many J-35s are flying with the WS-21, an upgraded but ultimately transitional variant of the older WS-13. From a US defense planning perspective, this is a critical data point. It confirms that China is suffering from what we might call strategic impatience. They are building the airframes faster than they can build the lungs to power them. For Washington, this translates into a quantifiable gap, A J-35 with transitional engines has a higher thermal signature and a lower supercruise capability. It's a stealth fighter that has to scream, use afterburners, just to keep up, which, ironically, makes it much easier for a US F-35 or an E-2D Hawkeye to find it. Deconstructing the 7-minute timer. So let's address the elephant in the hangar, that 7-minute CCTV leak. In the world of military intelligence, numbers are rarely accidental, but they are often misunderstood. If a J-35 can only fly for 7 minutes, it isn't a fighter. It's an expensive way to commit suicide. However, if we interpret 7 minutes through the lens of Combat Air Patrol, or CAP, at maximum afterburner, the picture changes. For Allied naval planners, this leak might actually be a quiet admission of a thermal management crisis. If the J-35's transitional engines or its internal cooling systems hit a thermal wall after 7 minutes of high-intensity maneuvering, the aircraft is effectively forced to disengage or risk catastrophic engine failure. For the US Navy, this short-legged reality is a tactical gift. It means that in a contested environment like the Taiwan Strait, Chinese stealth fighters have a very narrow window of lethality. They can get to the fight, but they can't stay in the fight. This complicates the PLA's anti-access strategy. If your primary stealth interceptor has the endurance of a sprinter rather than a marathon runner, the US Air Force can simply play the asymmetry of time, waiting for the J-35s to hit their thermal limits before moving in for the kill. The Fujian factor and the Email's leap. However, we shouldn't let the 7-minute irony blind us to the bigger strategic picture. While the internet laughed at the engine leaks, the PLA Navy was quietly making history. In late 2025, official imagery confirmed that the J-35 successfully completed its first electromagnetic catapult, or EMALS, launches from the Fujian. This is a milestone that only the United States has previously achieved. This matters to Washington for one reason: mass. By using EMALS, the J-35 can launch with a much higher maximum takeoff weight than the older J-15s on the Lianang. Even if the engines are currently inefficient, the catapult allows the J-35 to carry more internal fuel and a full load of PL-15 long-range missiles from the jump. According to SIPRI in IISS reports from early 2026, China is prioritizing the industrialization of stealth. Shenyang Aircraft Corporation has transitioned to pulse line assembly, aiming to double its output within the next 3 years. For US planners, the quality of a single J-35 is becoming secondary to the quantity of the fleet. A 7-minute fighter is a joke when there is only one. When there are 50 of them launched in rapid succession from an EMALS carrier, it's no longer a joke, it's a saturation problem. The J-35 doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be good enough to force the US to expend its limited supply of high-end interceptors. Here is the inconvenient truth that neither the 7-minute memes nor the Global Times editorials want to admit. China is currently suffering from a severe case of strategic impatience. For the last decade, Beijing has operated on a bits over atoms philosophy. Through cyber espionage and industrial mimicry, they have successfully stolen the bits, the blueprints, the RCS math, and the external geometry of Western stealth. But you cannot download metallurgy. You cannot hack your way into 50 years of institutional experience in high-bypass turbofan thermal management. From a US defense planning perspective, the J-35 represents a fascinating paradox. China is attempting to industrialize stealth before they have fully stabilized the foundational tech that makes a fifth-generation fighter viable in a long-range conflict. They are building a stealth swarm with short-legged engines. For Washington, this quietly changes the nature of the threat. We aren't looking at a peer-to-peer dogfight scenario where one J-35 takes on one F-35. We are looking at a Potemkin air wing, an impressive facade designed to push the US Navy further away from the coastline.
The J-35 doesn't actually need to win a 20-minute air battle. It just needs to look threatening enough to force a US commander to hesitate. The danger is that Beijing might start believing its own press releases. If they mistake quantity for capability, they risk a strategic miscalculation. In the cold logic of the Indo-Pacific, a fighter that excels for 7 minutes but fails at the 8th isn't a weapon. It's a liability that leaves your carrier defenseless exactly when the real battle begins.
Here is the non-obvious strategic insight. The Pentagon isn't worried about the J-35 because it's a perfect aircraft. They are worried because it doesn't have to be. In Western defense circles, we tend to obsess over one-on-one metrics. We compare the J-35's radar cross-section to the F-35. We compare the WS-19's thrust to the Pratt & Whitney F-135. In that vacuum, a 7-minute technical hurdle looks like a victory for the West. But for China, the J-35 isn't a standalone gladiator. It is a sensor node in a much larger, much more dangerous integrated strike network. According to reports from IISS and the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, CSBA, in early 2026, the real leap isn't the plane, it's the ecosystem. When the J-35 operates alongside the KG-600 airborne early warning aircraft and the Type 055 Renhai-class destroyers, it becomes a stealthy forward observer for China's massive inventory of long-range anti-ship missiles. From a US Navy perspective, this creates a deterrence of uncertainty. Even if a J-35's engines are struggling, if it can stay low observable for just those 7 minutes to pass targeting data to a shore-based DF-21D battery, it has fulfilled its mission. It doesn't need to win a dogfight, it just needs to enable a missile. The industrialization of stealth means that by 2030, the PLA Navy could field nearly 100 of these short-legged fighters across 3 carriers. For Washington, the hardware gap is closing, but the experience gap remains the last line of defense. The US has a century of carrier deck muscle memory that cannot be downloaded or simulated in a Shenyang wind tunnel. However, muscle memory fades if you aren't in the gym. As China ramps up its pulse line production, the US advantage of experience is facing a brutal deadline against China's advantage of scale. At the end of the day, the J-35 isn't just an aircraft, it's a barometer for the future of the Indo-Pacific. Whether that 7-minute leak is a literal technical failure or a tactical distortion, it points to a much larger reality. China is no longer content with being a regional power. They are building the tools of a global hegemon, even if those tools are still going through some very public growing pains. For US and allied defense planners, the takeaway is clear. We cannot afford to be complacent because of a short-legged engine, nor can we afford to be panicked by a sleek, stealthy exterior. The real challenge of the next decade won't be a single dogfight over the Pacific. It will be the endurance of our own industrial bases and our ability to maintain a qualitative edge while China attempts to drown that edge in sheer quantity. So, the question for you today is this: which is the greater risk for the West? A China that achieves stealth parity through long-term engineering, or a China that realizes its high-tech ambitions are failing and decides to act out of desperation before the window of opportunity closes forever? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We read every one of them to better understand the strategic pulse of our audience. If you found this analysis sharp, consider subscribing. This is Minh Quan Story International. News told differently.